Buy a subscription to The Athletic this December and gift one absolutely free. See the link in the description for more information.
Frank Lampard's Chelsea are now surging up the table, and he and Jose Mourinho, his former manager, are probably in charge of the two teams most likely to disrupt the Liverpool-Manchester City duopoly. Of course, Frank Lampard excelled under Mourinho as a player when Mourinho managed Chelsea himself. But how much of an influence did that period have on Lampard the manager? When Jose Mourinho arrived at Chelsea, he brought with him the 4-3-3 formation. He also made some really astute acquisitions, adding players like Petr Cech, Carvalho and Didier Drogba to a squad that was already quite strong, and a squad which already included Frank Lampard. Mourinho's Chelsea has been written about quite a lot, but it's worth just refreshing our memory as to what the basic fundamentals of his play were. So this is sort of the starting formation and lineup from the first season. What we can see here is the 4-3-3 with wingers who stayed very wide, but would also swap around quite a lot. So Robben would come over here onto this side, Duff would come up here. Obviously, Joe Cole was another player that was used out wide. Didier Drogba was very much the front man, a kind of multi-purpose forward who could occupy two defenders, who could drop off, win aerial balls, very much the complete forward. Lampard actually started as a 10 in a 4-2-3-1, which was the situation that Mourinho first tried to institute, but gradually became much more of a sort of box-to-box 8 player here. So getting forwards into the box, looking to score goals, but also creating opportunities for other players. A couple of key things about this system. The fullbacks would be quite aggressive. In the second season, it was Eja Del Horno here on the left and Gallas over on the right. But they would get forwards quite a lot to support the wide players, who would look to tuck inside sometimes and shoot. This was one of Robben's, obviously, key attributes. But also tucking inside slightly so the fullbacks were an option behind the wide players. Crucially, of course, Claude Makaleli operated in this role here, the Makaleli role. And he had kind of two functions. Firstly, he was there to screen this area here and make sure that the defence were difficult to get at in the first instance. But he was also absolutely integral in short build-up play, so that he would be there to get the ball forwards into the midfield. The crucial point about the 4-3-3 versus the 4-4-2 was that there was always an extra man in midfield. So if we look here, we've got two strikers that can pin the two centre-backs. These two central midfielders can take the other two central midfielders, but that always leaves Makaleli free. Now, if one of these midfielders pushes forwards, that leaves this central midfielder here free. Obviously, that player could then tuck inside, but then the fullback has a free run. It was basically quite a simple way of achieving numerical superiority in the middle of the pitch. Further up the pitch, that didn't matter too much either, because that numerical superiority could translate with Lampard's deep surging runs. But also, in Didier Drogba, you had a striker who genuinely could occupy two central defenders. Also, if this fullback here on the right, for example, pushes up, and that wide player tucks inside, you're still getting at least numerical equality, if not superiority, and that's why the runs of Lampard were so important. So that's a quick refresher about how Jose Mourinho's Chelsea played. Obviously, Lampard was a really, really important cog in that system, and Mourinho and Lampard clearly had a very strong bond as a coach and player. It's probably fair to say that Mourinho influenced Lampard as a player more than perhaps any other coach. So it's natural to infer that maybe he's had as much of an influence on Lampard the manager. So let's see if that's true. Now, if we'd made this video a month or so ago, it probably would have been more difficult to really lay out what Lampard's philosophy as a manager was. Last season, certainly because of Chelsea's transfer ban, there was the integration of young players. But apart from that, there was quite a bit of flip-flopping in systems. It was difficult to really pin down what Lampard was trying to do, and certainly to see whether he was being particularly effective. However, Chelsea have now moved to a 4-3-3 system with N'Golo Kante at the base of midfield. And it seems like this is sort of setting the pattern for how Chelsea are going to play going forwards. So let's have a quick look at that system. So this is the setup that Chelsea started the Leeds game with. And straight away, there are a number of similarities that we can pick out that are perhaps reminiscent of a Mourinho team. So obviously the system being a 4-3-3, the use here of Olivier Giroud as a kind of target man, somebody who can pin defenders back, but also somebody who's capable of dropping off and playing players in. We've got very, very quick wide player here in Timo Werner, and that's become increasingly important to Chelsea, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And in Kai Havertz and Mason Mount, two eights who are both capable of getting forwards, appearing around the edge of the box, and really carrying the team forwards in transition. Crucially as well, N'Golo Kante here in the Makaleli role. Now, when Lampard took over from Sarri, he inherited Jorginho, and Jorginho occupied this position in front of the back four. Now, Jorginho is a good player. He's a good player at long passes. He's able to thread through balls through. But this left Chelsea pretty weak elsewhere in midfield, and it meant that, with Kante actually here in this position, sort of shuttling backwards and forwards, the back four weren't really afforded the kind of protection that they needed. That has now tightened up significantly. So we'll take Jorginho off, put Kante back there, and bring in Havertz. Obviously, Kovacic has been used in this position as well, and there's something to say about Kovacic versus Havertz, which we'll come on to a little bit later. But this system looks a lot more solid. Crucially as well is Thiago Silva coming in. Now, Thiago Silva is somebody who adds experience, he adds organisation, as well as being a really good one-on-one defender. And his role in helping Kurt Zouma positionally, I think, has been crucial in transforming Chelsea's 4-3-3 into a much more solid system. It's worth remembering that Mourinho always would build from the back, and that in terms of, John Terry and Ricardo Carvalho, he had two central defenders who were both good, capable passers of the ball, but first and foremost were quite deep-sitting defenders. And it seems like Lampard has certainly taken a lesson there in how to strengthen the defence. These fullbacks are both very dynamic, Reece James and Ben Chilwell. They get forwards quite a lot. Hakim Ziyech is somebody who can drift inside and create a lot from these sorts of positions. His injury is potentially problematic for Chelsea because his ability to drift in and James' ability to come on the overlap and then fire crosses in was something that was really important for Chelsea. And this use of width and use of attacking with pace through the wide areas is something that Lampard really seems to have focused on recently, particularly because players like Mount and Havertz can then push up and attack the box. Chelsea do have flexibility in here as well. So, for example, we can take off Giroud and replace him with Tammy Abraham, who's a not dissimilar sort of striker in terms of being different from Chelsea's other options there. Or you could play Timo Werner through the middle and have Christian Pulisic out wide. And you can have Kovacic instead of Havertz. So there's good options for Chelsea. And Havertz, I think, is still developing. We had another video where we talked about his role at Chelsea and what maybe suits him best. And his ability to drive forwards and occupy the kind of 10 space and make these ghosting runs into the box is something I think we'll see increasingly more of. But at the moment, Kovacic is also a really good option there. He's restrained his ball carrying. He doesn't turn it over quite so much. And he provides quite a lot of solidity in that position. Also, it's worth noting that Billy Gilmour is coming back into fitness. And he's somebody that Chelsea are really interested in, perhaps as an 8, but also potentially as a longer-term successor in this sort of 6 screening role, somebody who can dictate play from deep. So Chelsea have got a lot of options. And What Lampard seems to be increasingly doing, and the Leeds game was a really good example of this, is he's turning Chelsea into a team that focuses on transitions. Quite a counter-attacking team. So with the defensive solidity of Zuma and Thiago Silva, the pace out wide in the fullbacks, and particularly the really, really exciting pace of players like Timo Werner, as well as the ability of midfielders like Mason Mount and Kai Havertz to push up, Chelsea are becoming much, much better at sitting deep and then springing forwards. Against Leeds, they went one-on-one with Leeds' man-marking system and were able to exploit those matchups to use their pace to get in behind Leeds, particularly in the second half. And that was really, really effective. And with the defensive solidity of Kante screening here, players like Werner and Havertz can really push forwards and get into dangerous attacking areas. This is playing to Chelsea's strengths, and they do seem to be a lot more organised. This system feels right for them. It feels right for the players that they have at their disposal. And, of course, the 3-4-3 is a system that Lampard is familiar with as a player, so it's probably something that he can coach with relative ease, particularly in the central midfield area. This looks like it's working for Chelsea. Swapping Kante in for Jorginho adds solidity, and that, plus the fact that it's a 4-3-3, does make it quite evocative of early Chelsea Jose Mourinho. But is it? Not really, no. Although this is a 4-3-3 and there is a central holding midfielder, and therefore it does look a lot like that early Mourinho Chelsea, it looks a lot like lots of other things now. Those are things that Mourinho brought into English football, but since then, in the 15 years or so that have elapsed, they've become very, very commonplace. So there's lots of other examples. If anything, the use of the wide forwards and the emphasis on transition attacking is perhaps more indicative of Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool, for example. Now, there's no doubt that Lampard has been influenced by Mourinho in various ways, and there is more to being a manager than just systems. So, there's probably influences in lots of these other areas. But to say that there's a tactical influence specifically on this Chelsea team is very hard to argue.
If you're looking for holiday gifts this winter, we're pleased to be able to offer a buy one, gift one deal on subscriptions to The Athletic. It's world-class sports journalism with a roster of writers including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence, Daniel Taylor and Ollie Kay. There's dedicated journalists for each Premier League team, bringing you all the latest news and inside information, not to mention hundreds of journalists doing the very same thing for 10 other sports. So, to buy one and gift one this December, see the link in the description, and thanks for watching today's video.